Chapter 919. Defying gravity. Flying down the slope of the mountain, Sonny left the shadows and did something that would have usually been considered a very stupid move in a battle. He leaped into the air, soaring high above the ravine, and then plummeted down. Experienced warriors all knew that performing a jump in combat had no benefit, and instead left one open to a potentially lethal attack. Worst of all, the jumper had nothing to use as support, so dodging or changing direction to avoid the strike was all but impossible. It even prevented one from performing a truly powerful attack, since power was born from the ground beneath the soles of one's feet and traveled all the way up through their body, to the tip of their blade. However, desperate times demanded desperate measures. Falling, Sonny strained his muscles and drew his bow. Even that was much harder in the air, but he managed somehow. As wind whistled in his ears and the ground rushed toward him with frightening speed, he opened the floodgates of essence and activated two enchantments. One was Death Dealer, of Morgan's warbow. The other was Feather of Truth, of the mantle of the underworld. Below, Saint was desperately fighting three corrupted abominations. Her armor was covered by a net of cracks, and fine ruby dust was flowing through several of the breaches. The enemy was on the verge of overwhelming the stalwart knight. But then, an arrow that seemed to be forged out of pale gold flashed through the air and struck one of the tall nightmare creatures in the shoulder. The force carried by it was so great that his dark armor exploded into shards, and the arrow's sharp broadhead sunk into the flesh beneath. No more than that. The abomination's whole arm was cleanly severed, taking a big chunk of the shoulder with it. Dark blood splattered on the snow as the corrupted was thrown off balance, staggering back. The sight of it was both gruesome and spectacularly morbid. And a moment later, Sonny landed on another voiceless like a cannonball. There was no sophistication in this attack. He had simply turned himself into a living, breathing torpedo, making the mantle of the underworld weigh several tons with the help of the Feather of Truth, and enlisting the help of gravity, he fell from high above and crashed right on top of a corrupted demon assaulting Saint. The result was earth-shattering. The towering abomination was not exactly flattened, but it did topple like a house of cards, its armor bending and breaking. Both of them hit the ground with a deafening bang, Sonny on top. Something snapped with a nauseating crunch. The stones beneath them violently cracked, and a cloud of snow was thrown into the air by the shockwave. Sonny was tossed aside and bounced off the ground before coming to a halting stop. If not for the bone weave, his neck would have been twisted at an unnatural angle. But he was seemingly alive, and even in one piece. Ouch! Just like that, in less than a second, two of the three corrupted abominations were severely wounded and debilitated. However, that was just the opening act of Sonny's arrival. Luckily, what came next did not require his active participation. It was a good thing, too, since he was not capable of doing anything at the moment. He needed a second or two to come back to his senses. Maybe three. Two shadows burst from his body. One of them wrapped itself around Saint, while the second one flew toward Nightmare. The next moment, Saint's armor shone with dark radiance, and the ruby flames of her eyes slightly changed hue. Although Sonny was momentarily stunned, she was not. More than that, she did not waste even a split second, using the opening he had created for her to instantly launch a ruthless attack. Radiating a sense of newfound power, the taciturn demon exploded forward. Before the disoriented nightmare creatures could react, she descended upon the voiceless that Sonny had sent crashing into the ground. The sin of solace flashed, sliding through the wide crack in the damaged armor and piercing the demon's heart, then emerged from his back in a rain of blood. As Sonny was struggling to stand up, the spell whispered, "You have slain a corrupted demon, voiceless prelate. Your shadow grows stronger. You have received a memory." That was all he needed to hear to regain his bearings and shrug off the disorientation. The world had stopped spinning. Everything hurt, but what else was new? The cruel sight was already weaving itself from a tenebrous mist, a second or two away from manifesting into reality. Sadly, he did not have those seconds. A black hand was already stretching toward him, its grasp promising nothing but suffering and death. Ghostly blue light was swirling beneath the inky skin. Instead of Sonny's throat, the hand was met by the blade of the moonlight shard. The long stiletto pierced the palm of the abomination and then twisted, tearing it open. The ghostly light flowed out of the wound, clinging to the transparent blade, but failed to do any damage to it. The cadence of the battle had drastically changed. Before, Saint was fighting alone against 3 corrupted abominations. Now, only 2 of them remained, and one was missing an arm, bleeding profusely from the terrible wound. She was also not alone anymore. Sonny was by her side. And the 2 of them. Sonny pitied the fools who would choose to oppose them. The corrupted were strong and menacing, but they lacked the skill and tenacity of the master and his shadow. They also lacked a crucial quality, the ability to fight as one, seamlessly cooperating to achieve the result that was larger and more lethal than the sum of its parts. Sonny and Saint, though, they had that quality in spades. They knew each other so well that there was no need for trivial things like words between them. Sonny did not even have to use shadow dance to understand his loyal demon's combat will perfectly. She was his shadow, after all, and also one of the masters from whom he had learned the most. Fighting back to back with Saint, he had missed that feeling. She had been forced to act independently by the circumstances as of late, so they rarely received opportunities to enter battle together. Let's kill these wretches fast and go help Nightmare. Brandishing the cruel sight and the sin of solace, the 2 of them faced the towering corrupted. They wasted no time to attack. It had not been too hard to cut down the 2 corrupted abominations. Well, of course, it was. Both were terrifyingly powerful and vicious. A single creature like that could have decimated a whole brigade of mundane soldiers and erased an entire human citadel from the map. The smallest touch of their hands was enough to obliterate the soul of a powerful awakened. But Sonny and Saint were stronger. Not in the literal sense, since both were lacking in terms of physical strength when compared to the voiceless. However, their skill, synergy, and murderous resolve were unrivaled. Luring the abominations into a trap after trap and helping each other avoid the retaliatory strikes, they swiftly cut the looming creatures down. The fact that one of the creatures was missing an arm and losing rivers of blood helped, too. In a sense, it was similar to facing carapace centurions back on the Forgotten Shore. Those monsters had been higher than Sonny in both class and rank, and yet he had killed his fair share. These ones, even though corrupted nightmare creatures were much more powerful, he was not a sleeper anymore either. Sonny's own power had grown immensely in the past years. In fact, he could have dealt with the 2 voiceless abominations even faster, but his mind was also preoccupied by manifesting shadows to help Nightmare hold on. With a swarm of black tentacles supporting him, the dark courser managed to last until Sonny and Saint were done with their prey. The rest was simple, if not at all easy. Facing dozens of fallen abominations was a daunting task as well. It took all Sonny had to obliterate them while keeping his shadows alive. The battle was arduous, brutal, and bloody. His body was full of holes by the end of it, and his mind was on the verge of collapse due to exhaustion. However, the 3 of them were a harrowing threat to oppose. Without the corrupted leading them, the rest of the voiceless had no choice but to succumb to the aura of fear emanating from Nightmare, Saint's merciless blade and his shadows. The sin of solace severed their bodies. Nightmare's hooves and fangs tore them apart. The cruel sight burned them down, and the swarm of manifested shadows restrained and blocked them to make the killing easier. By the end, The narrow ravine was all but buried in corpses. The last one to die was the corrupted whose mind Saint had destroyed before Sonny arrived, feeling a sense of dreadful threat from the tall abomination. Sonny chose not to approach it and summoned Morgan's warbow once again instead. The creature turned out to be incredibly resilient. He had to sink dozens of arrows into its flesh to kill it. The corrupted eventually fell to its knees, burdened by the weight of them, but even then it did not die for a while. The black threads piercing its lips did not give until the very end, no matter how much the abominable creature clawed at them with its immense strength. Through all of it, the emotionless expression on the gaunt face of the corrupted had disturbingly not changed once. But eventually, its hands fell down and it grew still kneeling. Only then did the spell speak. "You have slain a corrupted devil, defiled herald. Your shadow grows stronger." Letting out a heavy sigh, Sonny lowered his aching arms and sunk to the ground, utterly spent. At long last, the battle was over. He had survived, and the convoy had too. He could see the transports through the shadow that had stayed back. They were safe and sound. Numb, Sonny stared at the ghostly flames of the aurora burning in the black skies above. His mind was empty. Who could have thought? On the shore of the lake that had turned into a scene of slaughter, Luster was sitting on a shard of a boulder, breathing heavily. In front of him, countless corpses were floating in the black water, and a mess of severed bodies and limbs littered the icy shallows. The smell of it all was truly revolting. Ah, what a disgusting sight. He was alive, at least. So were the rest of the irregulars. After Captain had somehow obliterated half of the swarm with a single arrow, and acted as though that was a perfectly normal thing to do in his usual manner, they had fought the remaining nightmare creatures and prevailed. Are all masters insane? No, that shouldn't be the case. Captain had to be extra insane. If everyone was that bizarre, humanity would have collapsed a long time ago. The captain was alive as well. Luster had no idea how he was dealing with the second swarm, which was out there somewhere, close by. But the simple fact that Kimmy was still able to channel his dark vision to the irregulars meant that their leader had not died yet. Someone that evil probably can't even die. I bet he's immortal. And yet, Luster found himself a little worried. For his own skin, of course. If Captain died, how would Luster himself survive? And if Luster died, how sad would all the beauties in the world be? What a tragedy. For their sake, I must live on, yeah. Robbing beautiful women of my company would be too cruel. Like Samara, or Miss Bate, or that pretty soldier he had gotten to know in the bunker, or those refugee sisters in the 3rd Civilian Transport, the list went on. Not Kimmy, though. Well, she can't help it, poor thing. Being unattractive must be her flaw, so sad. And yet, the thought of dying on Kimmy made him especially upset, for some reason. Who else would spare her the time of day if I die? Therefore, Luster had to live. At that moment, he saw a familiar silhouette appear from the darkness. Flinching, Luster hurriedly stood up and took a step forward. "Captain, sir, you're back. Oh, I am so glad." However, something about the silhouette was wrong. The armor seemed about right, but since when was Captain so tall, and feminine? And cool? Luster stared at the approaching silhouette for a few moments, dumbfounded. What the? Then another figure emerged from the shadows, wearing a very similar suit of fearsome black armor. That was the captain. Staggering back, Luster tripped and fell on his butt. His eyes widened in horror. Gods, there's 2 of them. Sonny stared at Luster for a few moments, then sighed. What is wrong with that guy? The young man seemed unsure where to look. His startled gaze jumped between Sonny and Saint, full of confusion. Then strange sparks ignited in his eyes. "Ah, I see, so that is." Sonny did not let him finish. "You are alive, good. I take it that the swarm is dealt with." By that time, the other members of the cohort approached as well, so it seemed that all of them had survived. They looked relatively unscathed, too, which couldn't be said about Sunny and Saint. Both were in a rough shape, the taciturn demon worse off than he was. Nightmare was severely wounded, too, so Sunny had dismissed him. Now, the black steed was being nurtured back to health in the dark flames of Sunny's soul. He could not let Saint go, though. Not yet. He needed her strength to keep the convoy safe. If a shadow sustained serious damage, it would enter a slumber once dismissed. That slumber would last until the damage was sufficiently repaired, which meant that Sunny would not be able to summon the sleeping shadow for some time. Since Saint's wounds, while plentiful, were not life-threatening, he hoped to find a different solution, one that would keep her by his side in the coming days. Luster was not the only one who stared at the graceful knight with curiosity. The other irregulars seemed to have a lot of questions, as well. Some of them had known that their captain possessed a hidden ace, but none of them had seen her before. Surprisingly, usually quiet Kim was the first one to ask. "Captain, sir, who is that? Oh, sorry, ma'am, it is nice to meet you." Saint remained silent and indifferent like always. Her aloofness seemed to give Kim pause. The timid girl looked at the demon awkwardly. Sunny tilted his head a little and glanced at her with confusion. "Ma'am, what's up with that tone? And why do I feel that she's being more respectful to Saint than to me?" Frowning slightly, he said, "This is Saint. She is an echo of sorts." Luster's eyes turned into circles. "Why a saint? Captain, you have a saint as an echo." Sunny grimaced as an especially strong pulse of pain rolled through his body, stifled a groan, and shook his head. What kind of idiot would believe something like that? Gods. No, she is merely an ascended demon. She's just called Saint. In any case, Saint has been warding off a lot of threats before they had reached the convoy, but now she'll be traveling with us for a bit. So, get used to it. The irregulars did not mind. His use of the word merely had not been entirely appropriate. An ascended demon was an ascended demon. Facing one would give most masters a lot of trouble. Having such a powerful creature fighting on their side was an incredible boon, as far as the members of the cohort were concerned. At that moment, Quentin suddenly spoke, his usually gallant voice sounding a bit haggard. "Oh, I need to report something, Captain. We received a few memories after wiping out the swarm as usual. But this time, there was something else." He looked at Samara, and then a whirlwind of sparks appeared around them. Sunny blinked. "Is that what I think it is?" Soon 2 shapes appeared from the storm of sparks. Both were monstrous in appearance, resembling nightmarish hounds. One was about the size of a large wolf, while the other was larger than a PTV. Black tongues hung from their ferocious maws, dripping with venom. Quentin smiled brightly and patted the smaller monstrosity on the head. "We also received 2 echoes. This one is Blackie, an awakened beast. The other one is an ascended monster, and oh, I am actually not sure what Sam called it." He glanced at the giant abomination, and then looked at Samara questioningly. Her face remained as deadpan as ever. She remained silent for a few moments, and then said laconically, "Abomination." Quentin cleared his throat. "And the other one is called Abomination. We were bound to get an echo sooner or later, of course, but 2 at the same time. Isn't this great news, Captain?" Sunny tried very hard to appear calm. His expression was perfectly composed. "Are you goddamn kidding me? What the hell? How could they get 2 whole echoes, while he had not received even one after Nightmare, despite slaughtering literal thousands of enemies? What rotten luck was that?" Suddenly, the transcendent memory he had received, and could not wait to study, did not seem as that much of a jackpot anymore. A shaky smile appeared on Sunny's face. "Yeah, great news indeed." He glanced at the 2 monstrous hounds, one small, the other one large, and swallowed his bitter envy. Then, Sonny turned to Quentin and said, "In any case, I want you to see if you can use your ability to heal, repair Treat Saint. I don't know if it will work, but do your best. We'll need her strength soon." Sonny had a good reason to believe that Quentin's healing aspect would be effective in helping Saint, at least to some degree. The graceful knight was a strange creature. Her body was different from that of a human, or most nightmare creatures for that matter. It was not exactly made of flesh, but it was also not really stone. Instead, it was something in between, having characteristics of both. Applications of modern medicine would obviously not work, since even the greatest surgeon would be utterly lost at what to do with Saint's mysterious anatomy. Healing aspects might not be of any use either, since most of them were aimed at mending flesh. However, Quentin was a bit special in that regard. His ability was not actually to heal, but instead to restore. It was slower and less effective than more straightforward healing powers, but also more universal. Sonny had seen Quentin treat people, repair machine parts, and even mend cracks in the hull of a ship. In battle, he used that ability to keep his armor from breaking apart no matter how much damage it sustained. So, since the chivalrous healer could restore both living beings and inanimate objects, was there anyone better suited to treat Saint, who seemed to be a bit of both? That was what Sonny was thinking about as they walked through the snow, returning back to the convoy. Luckily, his guess turned out to be correct. Although slowly, Saint's broken armor started to mend under Quentin's touch, and the flow of fine ruby dust that served her as blood was stemmed. For now, she would still be able to help him defend the refugees. But how many battles like the one they had won today were there ahead? How many would it take to kill them all? Back in the Rhino, Saint remained in the cargo hold, standing near the engineering workstation while Quentin continued the slow process of mending her armor and stone-like flesh. If people did not know better, they would have thought that she was an actual statue. Since the healer was busy with the captain's echo, the rest of the irregulars found themselves robbed of his care. Although no one sustained serious wounds, except for Sonny, there were still a few scrapes that had to be tended to. Unexpectedly, Bate volunteered to administer first aid. As it turned out, she had some medical knowledge. The members of the cohort did not care too much about who treated their wounds, really, well, except for Luster. The fool seemed very excited for some reason. Sonny himself had long ago dismissed his battered armor and was sitting in the lounge area, looking at his black bodysuit with some regret. The uniform was truly the result of a magnificent design. Among other features, it was even able to repair itself. However, everything had its limits. With how much abuse he had put it through, the bodysuit was definitely a goner. It was full of holes, looking like a set of rags. His body beneath hurt all over, too. Well, figures. At least there was good news as well. The convoy was already moving forward. After reaching the valley, the mundane soldiers and the civilians had been shocked to see the scene of slaughter there. They were even more disturbed after witnessing the narrow ravine where Sonny, Saint, and Nightmare had fought the Voiceless. In fact, even the members of the cohort seemed a bit pale. Regardless, the battle had gone surprisingly well for the convoy. Not only had they survived without suffering any losses, but the irregulars even managed to acquire 2 echoes. The monstrous hounds were going to be of great help in their long journey. Sonny's list of assets was slowly growing. He had made use of the echoes right there and then, commanding his soldiers to send them to recover soul shards from the corpses of the fallen and corrupted abominations of the voiceless swarm. Fishing out the black tongues from the water was too much trouble, so he had just left them there. Soon the lake would freeze again, encasing the mangled corpses of the nightmare creatures in ice. That would probably be a macabre sight. Sonny had kept the soul's shards of the corrupted to himself, while sending the rest to the lone sleeper, whatever his name was. Just like that, the lucky bastard got even closer to fully saturating his core, without ever lifting a finger. At least he was getting stronger. Sonny needed all the strength he could get. Still, he was a bit infuriated by how easily his subordinates were getting the good stuff. Was there no justice in the world? At least there were the memories he had received. Before Sonny could summon the runes, however, Bate approached him, carrying one of the unreasonably expensive medkits he had outfitted the rhino with. He looked at her in confusion. "What?" The young woman frowned. "What do you mean, what? I'm here to treat you. Come on, get out of that raggedy uniform. I don't have all day, you know." Sonny stared at her for a bit. No need." Bate let out a heavy sigh. "Let's not do that whole bravado thing, okay? Even if you are a master, you are still going to bleed to death if I don't administer the clotting agent with all these wounds. I need to clean them too, unless you want to risk going into septic shock, of course. In that case, be my guest. Stay where you are." Sonny remained silent for a few moments, then shook his head. "I don't bleed." The young woman blinked a couple of times. "Huh." He waved his hand and pointed to his body. Indeed, although there were plenty of holes in the bodysuit, there was very little blood. "Bleeding is too pedestrian, so I don't bleed." Bates stared at him, lost for words. He shrugged. "If that's all, go away, I'm busy." She gritted her teeth and glowered at him. "Oh yeah, what are you so busy with?" Sonny silently studied his bodysuit for a few moments, and then answered in a somber tone. "At being miserable." Bate flung her arms up, turned around and walked away. Finally, left alone, Sonny summoned the runes, looking up his shadow fragments first. Shadow fragments, 1601/4000. His progress had slowed after being dispatched to low 49, but now its speed was picking up again. Still, he had a long way to go. Next, Sonny checked on Saint and Nightmare. Shadow fragments, 146/200. Nightmares required, 333/1000. Once he fed the memories received from the Black Tongues to the taciturn demon, she would finally cross the 150 fragments mark. 3/4 there. If Saint became transcendent, his power was bound to increase drastically. However, progress on that front was tortuously slow. With how many soul shards he now had access to, Sonny could have tried to create a few memories himself. But weaving memories required a lot of time and even more essence, and while the former was scarce, it was the latter that was truly precious. Essence was the most valuable thing in Antarctica. There was never enough of it, and since Sonny did not know when the next battle would come, he could not allow himself to waste it on weaving ethereal strings. Making Saint a transcendent in the future was not going to help him if he died today, starved for essence and unable to fight well. On the other hand, his steed was collecting nightmares with a surprising speed. It was probably because the Dark Destrier was harvesting the seeds that he had planted into the souls of abominations during the last 2 months. That was good, too. Sonny could not wait to learn what Nightmare's terror ability was like. Lastly, he studied the runes describing the mantle of the underworld. Vanquished foes, 5732/6000. And so close. If things did not go well, he would probably fill the counter of the Prince of the Underworld enchantment before arriving to Erebus Field, or very soon after. Good, I mean bad, I mean good. I do hope that we won't have to fight battles like the last one often on the way to safety, but if we do, at least I'll get something from it. The problem was that the mantle was currently damaged and needed some time to restore itself. He could have summoned it and activated the Living Stone enchantment, but once again, that would consume a lot of essence, and Sonny was already dangerously short on it after slaughtering 2 entire swarms of abominations. Let's see the main prize then. He inhaled deeply, and then looked at the list of his memories. Among them, two new ones especially attracted his attention. One was called Bitter Cusp. The other was called Stifled Scream. Sonny shifted a little, trying to find a position that caused him the least pain. His wounds were already healing, so, to add insult to injury, he also felt itchy all over. Masters were vastly more resilient than mundane humans, and their bodies could naturally recover from being severely damaged, and that was without even counting the tenacious potency of the blood weave. However, the process was still not pleasant. Trying to ignore the discomfort, Sonny decided to take a look at the bitter cusp first. It was one of the memories he had received after decimating the swarm of black tongues, and while all the rest would be best used to feed Saint, he felt like holding on to that one. The reason was very simple. Unlike the other memories, Bitter Cusp was of the ascended rank. Concentrating on the runes, Sonny read. Memory Bitter Cusp. Memory rank ascended. Memory tier I. Memory type tool. A tool, huh? What kind of tool would the monstrous beasts have left behind? Sonny knew not to underestimate the value of utility, but still, he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. The usefulness of this type of memories was often situational. The autumn leaf he had used to change the color of his hair was also a tool. Hopefully, this thing will be more practical. He continued to study the runes. Memory description. They entered the beautiful halls of the Jade Court harboring venomous desires in their black hearts and hiding rapacious snarls behind their admiring smiles. The mistress of the palace herself presented them with a cup of the sweetest nectar. No matter how much of the sweet nectar they drank, the cup remained full. The more of it they consumed, the more of it they desired. Soon there was nothing but bestial need left, and nothing but bitterness remained. Sonny scratched the back of his head. Well, that's one weird description. I do wonder if the Jade Court has something to do with that beetle I fought, though. He turned his attention to the enchantments. There was only one. Enchantment, Black Venom. Enchantment description. This cup overflows with a bitter venom. Do not drink it. Ugh. Sonny hesitated for a bit, then summoned the bitter cusp. Soon, a beautifully engraved chalice of white jade appeared in his hand. Indeed, it was full of a perfectly black liquid. Yeah, not drinking that, definitely. For some reason, Sonny had a strange compulsion to take a sip. Maybe it was because the spell had straightforwardly instructed him not to. However, his intuition was telling him that the black liquid was, indeed, a deadly poison, and if it felt deadly to him, then it had to be rather potent. Politely asking an enemy to have a drink did not seem like a good idea, which was not to say that there was no use for the ascended toxin. Smearing the black venom on a blade was one of them, for example. It would also not be a problem to stealthily add a drop or two into someone's food or drink. Not that he would do such a thing, of course. Satisfied, Sonny dismissed the bitter cusp and concentrated on the second memory that had caught his attention. He had high hopes for this one, considering that it came from a corrupted demon, voiceless prelate. The runes read. Memory Stifled Scream. Memory rank Transcendent. Memory tier III. Memory type Charm. Jackpot. Charms were rare and extremely useful, and it was especially so for Sonny, considering that both Saint and the mantle of the underworld had the ability to fuse one into themselves. He already had one transcendent charm, but a second one was most welcome. He continued to study the runes. Memory description. A great river was contained within it, flowing endlessly from the future into the past. When doom came, many entered to seek shelter from it, and many had come to seek the truth. That was because the great river existed outside time, and so it was said that a dreadful secret was hidden at its estuary. Few of those capable dared to approach it, and none of those who had returned. A mysterious That description really had not told Sonny much. Perplexed, he remained motionless for a few moments, then shook his head and continued to read the runes. Enchantments, echoing silence, word of power. Echoing silence, enchantment description. When wearing this charm, the physical power of its master is augmented, but only as long as they remain silent. The longer their silence lasts, uninterrupted, the greater the boon of power they'll receive. Sonny tilted his head. Interesting. So it was a comprehensive physical boost. It started off modest, but would slowly grow for as long as the person wearing the charm did not speak or use their voice in any kind of way, be it to scream, laugh, or groan. The stretch of silence also had to be uninterrupted, meaning that the augmentation would be reset both if the condition was broken or if the charm was dismissed. Of course, there was a ceiling to this augmentation, but considering the transcendent rank of the stifled scream, that ceiling had to be a rather high one. That did not seem too useful for Sonny at the moment, since he constantly had to talk to people and give orders. However, it was simply perfect for Saint, who was either incapable of speaking or chose not to. Even after all this time, Sonny still did not know whether it was the former or the latter. Thoughtful, he glanced at the second enchantment. Word of power, enchantment description. A word spoken by the master of this charm is a command. If born of great silence, the word of power can hardly be ignored. If not, it has no worth. That one was different. The enchantment was extremely powerful, since there were few limitations attached to it. Commanding the enemies to kneel or turn on each other, Sonny could imagine many great uses for such an ability. However, its compelling power also depended on how long the wearer had remained silent before uttering the command. Ironically, this enchantment was extremely useful to Sonny, but utterly useless to Saint. What a complicated memory! With a sigh, he dismissed the runes and then stood up. Walking to the communication suite of the Rhino, he then hailed Sergeant Gier on the radio. A few seconds later, Sonny heard a response. "Yes, Captain." Sonny summoned the bitter cusp, placed it on the surface of the terminal, and stared at it with a pondering look. He had a great idea on how to use it. "Ah, yes, Sergeant Gier. Listen, when we reach our next stop, I'll give you a very pretty cup. Be sure to have all our ammunition be treated with the black liquid from that cup." A tiny bit of an ascended poison smeared across the blade of the Sin of Solace, or the cruel sight would have very little effect on his performance in battle, considering that the only nightmare creatures that gave him enough trouble to require additional solutions would be all but immune to a negligent dose of the black venom. The only abominations such a small dose would kill were of the lower ranks, and he could already dispatch those easily. That was not the case for the mundane soldiers, however. To them, even dormant nightmare creatures were a great challenge, not to mention the awakened ones. The bitter cusp could potentially change that situation entirely. Grinning ominously, Sonny lingered for a bit and then added, "Oh, but make sure to not touch the liquid. If even a single drop gets on your skin, you'll die. In gruesome, terrible agony. So, wear gloves, I guess. Better yet, use a long stick." The convoy moved forward in the darkness. Climbing the slopes of icy mountains and navigating the complicated network of old, forgotten concrete roads, they traveled north in a desperate hope to survive the calamity of the chain of nightmares. A day after the battle on the frozen lake, the convoy reached a derelict meteorological station and made camp. Military vehicles were arranged in a circle, with turrets facing out. Food was cooked and distributed to the refugees, and tired people settled in the half-collapsed buildings to sleep and rest. Sonny used that time to make his plans of coating the bullets of mundane soldiers with poison come to fruition. The process had turned out to be harder than expected, but they managed to find a solution in the end. The task of handling the bitter cusp was entrusted to the convoy's lone sleeper, whose green snakeskin armor imbued the young man with a high enough resistance to toxins. The old woman who had been going through her own first nightmare quietly passed away during that night. The fact that her body did not turn into a frenzied abomination proved that she had passed the trial of the spell. However, it seemed that her weary soul was unable to form a stable core, and so it collapsed, turning the woman hollow. Sonny took the dark responsibility of disposing of the body upon himself. In the morning, they held a somber funeral under the eerie lights of the aurora, and then dove back into the bitter cold of the twisting roads. The small column of vehicles continued to struggle against the rough terrain and the dreadful conditions of the polar night as it slowly ventured deeper into the mountains. In the next few days, they had to fight against several more packs of prowling nightmare creatures, but none of them were as large and threatening as the two swarms the irregulars had eradicated before. The battle readiness of the convoy had increased due to Sonny's efforts and a bit of luck. The two new echoes served as forward scouts and provided invaluable support in combat. The ascended one, Abomination, was especially fearsome. The sleeper bell was growing into his power too, and his core was well on its way to being fully saturated. The mundane soldiers were now capable of dealing with weaker nightmare creatures thanks to the bitter cusp. Saint was slowly growing stronger as her wounds healed, and the echoing silence, enchantment of the stifled scream, continued to accumulate power, little by little. To the people of the convoy, things appeared to be looking up. However, Sonny knew that it was just an illusion. In truth, their situation was becoming more dire with each day. The further north they moved, the more nightmare creatures there were. Navigating between powerful swarms of them was getting harder and harder, and so was avoiding the truly overwhelming hordes. The amount of small skirmishes the irregulars and their echoes had to fight was growing in both frequency and ferocity. For now, they were handling the pressure fine, but their fatigue continued to mount, while their physical condition deteriorated. Small scrapes and injuries they received were bound to add up, sooner or later. Their reserves of essence were also getting closer and closer to not having enough time to replenish between fights, even with Luster's help. Additionally, the deeper they went into the mountains, the more signs of destruction caused by the earthquake they encountered. Many roads were completely destroyed by rockfalls or buried under countless tons of glacial ice. Increasingly often, the rhino could not handle clearing the path through the roads that remained. All of that meant that there were more and more enemies around, with fewer and fewer suitable paths to take. Sonny felt like a noose was being drawn tighter around his neck with each day. As a result, he had to lead the convoy forward using more risky routes. A few times, the civilian transports were very close to falling off the crumbling roads and plummeting into the deep gorges below, or being destroyed by falling debris. He had to leave the rhino and use shadow chains to secure the vehicles, shield them, or pull them to safety with his own two hands. He even had to resort to coming close to the abandoned tunnels that pierced the mountains here and there, promising convenient shortcuts and shelter from the chilling wind. However, just looking at the dark portals of their hungrily open maws made Sonny shiver. Driving past the old tunnels filled him with a sense of deep, gnawing unease. No goddamn way. The condition of the transports was also getting worse and worse. The rougher of a path he chose, the faster they broke down. Samara and Kim had to administer hasty field repairs more than a few times, but there was only so much they could do. The engines of the vehicles stalled. Their wheels got stuck in the deep snow. The heating elements malfunctioned and filled the interiors with acrid smoke. The batteries cracked and leaked because of being both overheated and exposed to terrible cold. There was no end to the problems Sonny had to solve. Damnation. Sitting in front of a screen in the command suite of the Rhino, he stared at the map. Sonny had just finished updating it with the information his shadows had brought back from a lengthy scouting mission. Many lines had been crossed out, and many red marks shifted position, drawing a narrow net around the convoy. In the absence of the black bodysuit, he was back to wearing the puppeteer's shroud outside of combat. His old and reliable armor possessed an enchantment called Doubtless, but ironically, he was full of doubts. Just how am I supposed to? At that moment, one of the transports behind the Rhino came to a screeching halt. The lights illuminating its interior went out, signaling a serious malfunction. The rest of the vehicles were forced to stop, too. Sonny looked down and sighed. What now? Standing up, he stretched, massaged his tired shoulders, and left the APC through the main hatch. Darkness and bitter cold welcomed him, and the cutting wind immediately tried to suck all warmth out of his body. Walking through the light snowfall, Sonny headed to the back of the convoy. Saint's silent figure gazed at him from the roof of the Rhino, where she stood with a bow in her hands. Looking up, Sonny found that the stars to the east appeared a bit hazy, as if veiled by something. A resentful frown appeared on his face. Don't tell me, is the blizzard picking up again? This was grave news. Walking toward the broken transport, Sonny was deep in thought. If the blizzard was really returning, things were going to get ugly for the convoy. Sure, the snowstorm would hide their location from the roaming swarms of nightmare creatures, but it would also all but destroy his own ability to track the abominations and keep his map up to date. Sonny and his shadows could see through the darkness of the polar night, but they could not see through the impenetrable wall of billowing snow. Additionally, the mundane drivers were going to have even more trouble with keeping their vehicles on the road. The vehicles themselves would suffer more stress, as well. Should he insist on continuing to drive through the blizzard, or find a place for the convoy to wait it out? Sonny did not like the thought of traveling across treacherous old roads in such hazardous conditions, but neither did he like the idea of being stationary, holed up in some cave like a blind rat, with no way to escape should things go south. Damned blizzard, damned rust buckets, why can't they all be like the Rhino? Of course, that was not a fair comparison to make. His Rhino was a state-of-the-art military carrier, while the civilian transports were just that. Some of them could barely be used to carry people, even since they had been hastily refitted from industrial cargo vehicles in preparation for the evacuation campaign. It was a miracle that they were able to move, honestly. Approaching the cause of the current setback, Sonny had to walk around the massive body of Abomination, who was laying on the road and staring east. The massive beast seemed to have sensed the approaching blizzard, as well, considering how intently it was looking at the sky. Snowflakes were falling on its rugged fur. The smaller Echo Blackie, or whatever the awakened beast was called, was there as well, leaning against the larger one. It had a habit of following the stronger monster everywhere, while Abomination mostly ignored its existence. Damned mongrels, would it kill you to make way for me? I am the master of your masters, you know. Show some respect. Shaking his head, Sonny reached the transport. Samara, Kim, and Quentin were already there, running diagnostics with grim expressions on their faces. He did not like the look of that. What's the situation? Samara glanced at him with a deep frown. Captain, it is serious this time. There was a charge overload in the hub relay, causing the main battery to be cut off from the rest of the systems. Usually, that wouldn't be too debilitating, but this transport already lost both the support battery and the backup accumulator. There's a lot of melted wiring. Quentin can restore some, but other parts will need to be replaced. Sonny did not understand much of what she had said, but then again, he didn't need to. That was the whole reason for employing specialists. He had become a big fan of delegation. So, how long is it going to take to get this transport moving again? Samara looked at Kim and Quentin, then hesitated for a bit. About 2 hours if we move fast. Sonny closed his eyes for a moment. 2 hours, that was not impossible, although cutting it close. Their window of opportunity to drive past the nearest horde allowed for such a delay, but not much more. If he let the convoy stall for 2 hours, there would be no space for mistakes in the next day or so. Could he afford that? Or should he abandon the transport and relocate people to the remaining ones, thus overloading the struggling vehicles even further and increasing the risk that they themselves might break down in turn? Curse it, did Nephis have to deal with this amount of nonsense during her short stint as the Bright Lord? Leading 500,000 crazed sleepers through a bloody revolt and a suicidal crusade might have been a bit harder than he had thought. Being in charge of hundreds of people was not at all fun. Sonny was slowly starting to understand why the sovereigns were all suffering from some sort of lunacy. He sighed. I can give you 110 minutes. If it's not done until then, though, we'll load the refugees on other transports and abandon this one. For now, do what you can. Jir will make sure that the passengers aren't cold. With nothing much to do after that, Sonny walked aside and stood in the shadows as his subordinates got busy with their tasks. He thought about returning to the warm interior of the Rhino, but decided against it. He had been cooped up inside it for a while, so some fresh air, even if it was bitterly cold, was a welcome change. The refugees inside the dead transport did not seem too discouraged, especially after soldiers brought a portable heater. The sleeper was there too. His lantern memory chased away the darkness, helping the civilians cope with their fear. And speaking of the sleeper, currently we don't have any more infected, which means that the infirmary transport is empty. If things don't go well with the repairs, I can just reassign the passengers there. That can be a good stopgap solution. There'll be trouble when someone does catch the spell, of course. His thoughts were interrupted by Abomination, who suddenly let out a low growl. Considering the size of the massive monster, its growls reverberated through one's very bones and were not easy to ignore. Sonny turned and looked at the echo with a frown. What's up with him, her, whatever? What's up with that thing? Abomination's monstrous snout was gnashed, revealing rows of terrifying fangs. It was still laying on the road, staring at the eastern skis. The echo looked tense. The other beast by its side was also acting nervous. However, it seemed to be simply repeating after the larger one without understanding the reason. Sonny's frown deepened, turning into a scowl. That can't be good. He walked over to Abomination and tried to climb on it to get a good vantage point. Don't move, you bastard. Reaching the creature's withers, he looked east, seeing the same thing that it saw. The veil of the blizzard had grown closer, and a large part of the horizon, what little of it could be seen between the towering mountain peaks, was now obscured by it. Sonny did not notice anything else, though. Does it not like snow? Then again, that blizzard was not of natural origin. It was caused by a titan called Winter Beast. From what Sonny knew, the titan was currently being suppressed by Saint Tyrus somewhere far to the north. That was why the snowstorm came and went, hinting at who was prevailing in the clash at the moment. Sky Tide's aspect also had to do with controlling winds and storms, so while it did not directly counter the Titan's powers, she could at least challenge its authority. In any case, Winter Beast could not be anywhere near the convoy. Then why? Suddenly Sonny's eyes narrowed. Looking closer at the distant haze obscuring the cold, dark sky, he suddenly had a very disturbing idea. Was it really the blizzard? Sonny stared at the distant haze for a few moments, then glanced at Kim, who was busy with repairs. The evil eye memory he had given her was supposed to make one capable of seeing things at a greater distance. However, there was an easier way. He called out to Sergeant Jir, who happened to be hurrying past at that exact moment. "Hey, Sergeant." The man stopped and looked at the captain, who was standing on top of the terrifying monster the irregulars had recently received from the nightmare spell, for some reason. Already accustomed to their leader's eccentric behavior, the soldier did not even bother to try and guess the reason. "Yes, Captain." Sonny lingered for a moment. "Do you have, what are they called, binoculars?" Jeer nodded. "Of course, sir. We have several pairs, one per vehicle. Standard military issue." Sonny gave him a tense look, then said quietly, "Go bring me the best ones." Slightly disturbed by that tone, Jeer glanced at the bundle of blankets he was carrying, then dropped them into the snow and dashed toward the tail of the convoy. Very soon, he returned with a pair of modern binoculars and, not daring to approach the monster, threw them to the captain. Sonny caught them, brought the unfamiliar device to his eyes and looked east. At first, the image was blurry and unclear, but then something hummed softly and it came into focus on its own. Suddenly, it felt as though he was standing much, much closer to the slope of a distant mountain. Sonny could even see the individual boulders, as well as mounds of snow between them. Moving the binoculars, he searched for a stretch of open sky. A few seconds later, he finally laid his eyes on the haze that obscured it. Sonny remained motionless for around a minute after that, then silently lowered his hands. His face remained still, but his eyes were suddenly terribly bleak. Feeling something, Sergeant Jeer cleared his throat. "Sir, what is it?" The captain looked at him with those bleak eyes, making the soldier shiver. "What is it?" Sonny repeated the question in his mind. What he had seen was not a wall of swirling snow. Instead, it was a ghastly creature that resembled a mix between a bat and a leech, with leathery wings, a long neck, and a head that seemed to be one giant, fleshy, circular maw. In fact, he saw thousands and thousands and thousands of them. The hazy veil that obscured the sky was not caused by the returning blizzard. It was a horde of flying abominations that was so vast that it resembled a rolling storm front from a distance. That vast horde of horrid abominations was swiftly moving in their direction. Suddenly, Sonny's mouth was terribly dry. He glanced at the convoy that stretched along the narrow road, a few vehicles blocked from moving any further by the broken transport. "Yes, sir." Sergeant Jeer's tense voice caught his attention. Sonny forced himself to focus on it, pulling his mind back to reality. "Dead, dead, they are all dead." Throwing the binoculars back to Jeer, he threw all unnecessary thoughts out of his mind and issued an order. "Get these people out and load them into the infirmary transport. Do it as fast as possible. No, faster than that." Jeer blinked. "The infirmary transport, but—" Interrupting him, Sonny barked. "Now!" The soldier flinched. This was the first time he heard the usually cool-headed captain shout. Understanding that something had gone terribly wrong, Jeer ran toward the broken transport. Move, move, move." A few minutes later, the frightened refugees were being hastily loaded into the infirmary vehicle. The soldiers were running around, preparing for a swift departure. The irregulars were getting ready for a fight. Sonny was in the middle of all this havoc, giving orders. "Load the poisoned ammunition immediately, all of it. Empty the reserves entirely. Throw all non-essential cargo out. We need as much speed as we can get. Samara, you have 3 minutes to charge as many bullets as you can. Luster, prepare the Rhino for an all-out charge. We are never going to make it. There's no chance, simply none." The enormous horde of flying horrors was traveling too fast. The convoy would never be able to outrun it, even if they were moving on a flat and well-maintained road. Of course, fighting it was not an option either. If the appalling creatures descended upon the convoy, everyone would be devoured within seconds. Sonny might be able to survive by turning into a shadow, but the rest— everyone would die a gruesome death. And yet, the horde seemed to be traveling from east to west, while the convoy was heading north. If by some miracle they managed to escape from the path of the abominations, maybe there still was a sliver of hope for them. Perhaps there even was some shelter ahead, one that Sonny had missed when he was compiling the map. In any case, he couldn't bring himself to just give up. No matter how small the possibility, he owed it to these people to make an effort to save them. He had taken them under his command, after all. They were his responsibility. Move! Finally, the broken transport was cleared of civilians. Sergeant Gier ran up to Sonny. "It's done, Captain. What do you want to do with?" Before he could finish the sentence, Sonny grabbed the massive vehicle by the front bumper, strained his muscles a little, and then tossed it over the edge of the road with his bare hands. The transport plummeted into the deep, dark gorge with thunderous clangor. It was so heavy that the road under them quaked from the violent force of the first impact. Sonny glanced at the stunned soldier. "Get everyone inside and start the engines. Hurry." As everyone ran to their vehicles, Sonny stepped through the shadows and appeared inside the Rhino. Sparing a glance at Professor Obel and Bate, he lingered for a moment and said, "Strap yourself in. It's going to be a bumpy ride." They listened without asking questions. Since most of the irregulars were assigned to the civilian transports, the only other person there was Luster. He was already in the pilot's seat, ready to send the APC forward at Sonny's command. Sonny did not make him wait long. "What are you waiting for? Go." The Rhino shot forward, plowing through snow as it cleared the way for the other vehicles. The convoy followed as they moved across the mountain road with reckless speed. But not enough of it. On the roof of the APC, Saint was effortlessly holding her balance. Standing there like a statue, she slowly turned her head east. Then the taciturn demon lingered for a moment and silently raised her bow. The Rhino flew forward, somehow navigating the twists and turns of the narrow mountain road without plummeting off its crumbling edge. There was nothing but darkness ahead, with snow swirling as it melted in the powerful beams of light that shot from the roof of the heavy vehicle. For once, Luster seemed serious and completely concentrated, his fingers wrapped around the yoke so tight that they had turned white. The convoy did its best to keep up. The civilian transports were sandwiched between the APC and the military vehicles, shaking precariously as they rolled forward at high speed. Sergeant Gier and his soldiers were hastily loading the poisoned ammunition into the feeding mechanisms of the turrets, turning their barrels east and aiming spotlights at the sky. The veil obscuring the horizon was getting closer and closer. Damn, damn, damn. Sonny was standing behind Luster, perceiving the world through the eyes of his shadows. They were gliding far ahead, scouting the path in search of serious obstacles and possible shelter. Shelter there was none to be found, and the devouring swarm was too fast to outrun. Suddenly, his head jerked sideways. A dozen or so meters ahead, a swift silhouette lunged at the approaching Rhino from a deep crack in the cliff's face. All Sonny had time to see was a powerful body, a glint of madness burning in a pair of frenzied eyes, and dozens of sharp claws that shimmered as if made of metal. Before the attacking nightmare creature that had laid in ambush received a chance to collide with the APC, a black arrow pierced its neck, throwing the abomination back and nailing it to the stone slope. Standing on the roof of the Rhino, Saint drew the string of Morgan's warbow again as the pinned corpse flashed by. Luster flinched, but kept the vehicle steady. "That was a close one, sir." Sonny had nothing to answer. They had to move with as much speed as they could muster, but advancing in such a reckless manner brought its own risks. Not being able to discover ambushes in advance was one of them. And even then, it would most likely not be enough. "Go faster." By now, everyone could tell that the approaching haze was strange and unnatural. They would not be able to see the flying horrors with their own eyes for a few more minutes, but fear was already spreading through the convoy. Sonny did not really need to tell anyone to hurry. But staying silent was too nerve-wracking, even for him. Curse it! In his mind was the image of the map of the mountains. Studying it, Sonny was feverishly trying to find a way to escape. He already knew the optimal route to take, but had a sinking feeling that it was already too late. He did not know the speed of the approaching horde, but judging by how fast the distant sky was being devoured by it, their chances were slim. Up ahead, a stray nightmare creature appeared on the road. Before it could react, a massive shape lunged at it from the darkness. Abomination's powerful jaws closed on the monster's throat, and then the echo threw it into the abyssal darkness of the gorge with a powerful twist of its neck. Then the ascended monster dashed forward, followed by the smaller echo. Soon, they reached a fork in the road and stopped, unsure of where to go. Sonny knew, however. His shadows had already explored both roads, confirming the information reflected on the map. A few moments before the rhino reached the fork, he leaned forward and spoke to Luster. "Take the right path." The right path was the only acceptable choice if they wanted to have even the tiniest hope of getting out of the path of the flying swarm. There was one problem, however. A few hundred meters ahead, it was blocked by the bodies of a pack of prowling nightmare creatures. Soon Luster saw them too. "Captain, what do we do?" Sonny gripped the back of the pilot's seat and leaned forward. "Just plow through them." What else could they do? The wedge-shaped ram of the rhino was already lowered. The abominations were awakened, at best. Tons of swiftly moving metal were bound to make short work of them, or if not, at least toss them off the road. Luster gulped and followed the instruction, accelerating toward the fearsome nightmare creatures without even a hint of slowing down or trying to avoid a direct collision. Not that it was possible to maneuver around the abominations on the narrow road, anyway. Before the creatures had time to properly react, the rhino shuddered as it slammed into the abominations, and its armored windshield was instantly splattered with a revolting mix of blood and mangled flesh. Without skipping a beat, Luster prevented the vehicle from lurching sideways with a small shift of the yoke and moved his gaze to the screen showing the feed from the external cameras. Until the wipers managed to clean the armored glass, looking through, it was all but impossible. Just like that, the pack of abominations was either torn apart or thrown off the road, clearing the way for the convoy. Except for one. Clinging to the ram of the rhino, a bleeding beast hoisted its massive body up, a powerful limb rising to strike a devastating blow on the windshield. Before it could, however, the shadows nesting between spotlights on the APC's front surged forward, forming into sharp spikes. They pierced the creature and then lost their solidity, turning into black tentacles. A moment later, the abomination was torn apart from the inside and flung into the darkness below. "Keep going." Sonny gritted his teeth and then flinched as one of the rear-view cameras registered a flash of light coming from the turret of Jeer's military vehicle. Turning his attention to it, he saw that the soldiers had opened fire. They were firing at the sky. The devouring horde was still some distance away, but the first straggler had just appeared from the cold darkness and dove down toward the convoy. The creature was not too large, but looked even more terrifying and revolting up close. A rain of bullets tore at its body, delivering the bitter cusp's toxin. It should have been enough to kill the flying abomination, but the effect of the poison was not instantaneous. Either the soldiers had reacted too slowly, or the nightmare creature was too fast. No matter the reason, its mangled, convulsing body kept falling, approaching the windows of one of the civilian transports. That was before another arrow flashed through the air, slicing the abomination in half. The severed part struck the slope and then rolled down, soon disappearing under the wheels of the speeding vehicles with a repulsive crunch. Sonny let out a shaky breath, relieved. The worst was only starting, though. Because after that first creature was killed, the turrets did not stop firing. You have slain an awakened beast, brood of the devouring cloud. The road sloped down, soon reaching the bottom of a deep gorge and continuing forward along its twists and turns. Not afraid of sliding into the abyss anymore, the convoy received some breathing room and accelerated even more. However, despite that, their situation only worsened. By now, the distant mountains had already disappeared, swallowed entirely by the veil of the approaching swarm. Only a few nearest peaks remained visible, but even they were already turning hazy. More and more flying abominations that had traveled ahead of the horde were diving at the convoy, their fleshy circular maws opening wide to bite at the speeding transports and the soldiers operating the turrets. At first they came one after another. Then a few appeared at the same time. At some point, the rumble of the firing turrets turned into one continuous, rolling cannonade. The soldiers fought with desperate determination, relying on their spotters to find the targets in time. The murderous darkness of the polar night was cut and torn by the stark beams of powerful spotlights, and tracer bullets painted it with red streaks. High above, the ghostly aurora glimmered among the stars, slowly turning crimson. Sunny was cursing the world. Tired of waiting powerlessly inside the rhino, he climbed to its roof through the upper hatch and swayed as a furious wind assaulted him with cutting cold. A few steps away, Saint was standing straight, sending one arrow after another into the dark sky. Each arrow reaped a life, and the bodies of abhorrent creatures were raining down on the snow behind the convoy. In a gun nest on the roof of one of the civilian transports, Samara was discharging her rifle time after time. And somewhere high above, bloody explosions of charged essence bloomed with each shot. The other awakened were assisting the soldiers as well. However, even though each possessed a memory capable of dealing damage at range, they were less proficient with them. The sleeper, ironically, was the closest the convoy had to a marksman after Saint and Samara. His quiver was full of poisoned arrows. In an infuriating turn of events, Sunny was the only one without a suitable weapon. He only had one bow, and that one was currently being used by his shadow. Curses! The undying chain was already encasing his body, and the dying wish was calling out to the nightmare creatures, compelling the nearest ones to aim at him and him alone. That made the pattern of their attacks a little bit more predictable, causing more bullets to hit their mark. He did not know what else to do. All of it was meaningless anyway. The convoy could kill 1,000 of these flying monstrosities, and it would still be no more than a drop in the ocean. With each minute, the number of attacking abominations was mounting, and with each second, the devouring cloud was drawing closer. Soon, it would envelop the gorge completely, and then all their efforts would end in a gruesome and bloody finale. Sunny did not think for a second that the convoy would be able to fight through countless thousands of the flying abominations. Why did I not account for it? Fool, damned fool. It was not as though he had not fought swarms of flying nightmare creatures before. And yet, Sunny had never considered a situation like this one seriously enough to come up with effective countermeasures. What countermeasures were there, though? What was one supposed to do if the sky itself decided to devour them? He gritted his teeth. There was no way out, as far as Sunny could tell. They had already failed to escape from the path of the harrowing horde, and had not found a shelter to weather the heavenly plague. The soldiers continued to fire their turrets, hurriedly swinging the steaming barrels around to catch the brood beasts before they crashed into the transports. Saint and Samara continued their slaughter. But there was no point. Feeling a bitter taste in his mouth, Sunny looked up. The mountains had disappeared completely, swallowed by the seething haze of the devouring cloud. Numerous abominations blotted out the sky, making it seem as though the crimson lights of the aurora itself were spawning the all-consuming deluge of them. A minute or two later, the horde would flood the gorge and descend upon the convoy. His only solace was that not even a fraction of the nightmare creatures would be able to satiate themselves with human flesh. There were too few humans in the convoy to fill their stomachs. Starve the rest of you bastards. Lacking a suitable weapon, Sonny could not even help his people in their last stand. But that was not his job. His most important job as a leader was to think, and yet Sonny could not think of anything either. The image of the map was still flashing in his mind, almost burned into it. All the potential campsites and shelters he had marked in advance were too far away, and all the convenient roads he had scouted were useless. Saint suddenly stepped back, and in the next moment a corpse of one of the brood beasts crashed into the roof of the rhino. The APC shuddered, but continued to speed forward. A drop of fetid blood hit the visor of Sonny's helmet. He inhaled deeply and stared at the ugly maw of the dead abomination, numb to its repulsive appearance. Maw, these ghastly, hungry maws would soon be feasting on the flesh of his people. A hungry maw. Suddenly, a grim expression appeared on his face, hidden by the helmet. Turning around, Sonny dove back into the hatch, noiselessly landed on the floor of the APC's floor, and dashed toward Luster. Where is it? Where is it? Soon, one of his shadows noticed an old, almost entirely crumbled road that forked away from the main 100 or so meters ahead. The rhino was just about to reach it. Turn left. Luster's hands reacted faster than his mind, sending the rhino into a sharp turn. The vehicle trembled as its wheels left the somewhat intact surface of the better preserved road and entered the more dilapidated one. The young man spared a glance at his captain. "Sir, where are we going?" Sonny paled a little. "Into a hungry maw." He did not need to explain further, really. Now that they had entered the derelict road, there was only one way forward. And there, ahead of them, waited something that he had hoped to avoid at all costs. The dark portal of an old, abandoned tunnel. Not too long ago, Sonny had sworn that he would never enter one. But now he could only pray that they would reach it. As the convoy desperately drove toward the distant entrance of an old tunnel, the devouring cloud finally reached the gorge. The sky disappeared, blotted out by a slithering mass of the winged abominations, and submerged the world into impenetrable darkness. Even the dim glint of the shimmering stars was extinguished. The swarm flowed down the slopes of the mountains like a tidal wave. Penetrating the armored frame of the rhino, a deafening rustle of countless beating wings assaulted Sonny's ears. He grimaced, glanced at the screens one last time, and dashed back to the roof hatch. Once he climbed outside, the noise grew many times more violent, making it seem as though a hurricane was raging around him. The mass of nightmare creatures was seconds from swallowing the rearmost vehicles of the convoy. The overheated barrels of the turrets continued to discharge a barrage of bullets into the rushing wave of abominations, long tongues of flame blooming from their glowing muzzles. At that point, the soldiers did not even have to aim to hit the enemy. However, all their efforts were in vain. Sonny would have needed thousands of soldiers and hundreds of heavy artillery vehicles to put a dent into the swarm of abhorrent abominations. But he just needed to buy a little time. Saint. Following his mental command, the shadow turned and threw Morgan's warbow in his direction. Catching it, Sonny took a moment to balance himself on the swaying roof, and then drew the string with furious determination. All four of his shadows flowed forward from his fingers. A bolt of lightning streaked through the air, striking one of the brood beasts. The creature's body disintegrated in a blinding flash, and then dancing arcs of electricity spread through the swarm, stretching in all directions for dozens of meters. For a moment, the whole world was illuminated by a stark radiance. That bought the convoy a few more seconds at most. Not enough. Even if Sonny had essence to spare, he could not use the strike of thunder repeatedly. Like almost all memories, it needed time to be summoned and dismissed. Although the whole process took no more than a dozen seconds, right now, that was enough of a delay to doom them all. If Winter was here, she would have had a solution, but sadly, Sunny was all alone. Well, not quite. On the roof of one of the civilian transports, Samara overcharged her powerful rifle, causing some of the circuitry inside of it to melt in a rain of sparks. The usual electric whine of the activating coil was devoured by the cacophony of thousands of beating wings, but the thunderous roar of the resulting shot was not. A brilliant particle of light traveled toward the swarm at a tremendous speed, and then detonated with staggering violence. A huge explosion shook the ground, swallowing a whole swath of attacking abominations. Samara swayed and spat a mouthful of blood, showing signs of severe essence depletion, but the rest of the irregulars were not remaining idle either. The deluge of poisoned bullets and their memories were doing their job, buying the convoy precious time. The tunnel was getting closer and closer. But it was still not enough. The rearmost military vehicle was already suffering under an onslaught of attacks. Its armored hull was being cut open and peeled off, and blood was flowing down its sides. The soldier that had been operating the turret was nowhere to be seen, but another had already taken his place, only to scream a moment later when the razor-sharp fangs of a frenzied brood beast sunk into his arm. As blood rained down, the soldier gritted his teeth and drew his sidearm, discharging several mundane bullets into the creature's neck without any result. Sunny did not see the rest. The strike of thunder had finally manifested itself back into existence, and the shadows had just returned, so he sent the caged lightning into the swarm once again. Attracted by the dying wish, many abominations were ignoring the rest of the convoy and lunging at the rhino. For now, none of them had gotten past Saint, who brandished the sin of solace as she protected him. However, Sunny knew that he was not going to remain safe for much longer. Their salvation was so close. And yet their time was up. Despite all their efforts, Sunny and his soldiers could not hold the devouring cloud back anymore. The convoy was already surrounded by the mass of nightmare creatures from all sides. In stunned horror, Sunny watched as the rear vehicle was swallowed by the swarm of abominations. Its armor disintegrated as if made of paper, shredded into nothingness in a mere second. What followed? To hell with this. Before Sunny knew what he was doing, his body moved forward. Dashing to the back of the rhino, he flooded his muscles with essence and jumped. I must have gone crazy. Sunny soared into the air above the convoy, sensing sharp fangs scraping against the bleak steel of the undying chain. On his belt, a beautiful lantern cut of black stone suddenly opened, letting out a surge of darkness. Wreathed in that darkness, he plummeted down and landed on the roof of the damaged vehicle. Dozens of tentacles exploded from the kneeling figure that was shrouded in shadows, tearing countless brood beasts apart. More shadows flowed down like water, covering the breaches in the vehicle's hull and solidifying into impenetrable armor. At the same time, black walls rose from the ground, surrounding the convoy. Hundreds of brood beasts furiously crashed into them, causing the walls to shudder. However, at least for the moment, they held. Ahead of the column, the rhino finally reached the tunnel and drove through its entrance, disappearing into the lightless emptiness within. One after another, the other vehicles, as well as a few nightmare creatures, followed. The abominations were swiftly gunned down or killed by the irregulars. The damaged vehicle that Sunny had landed on entered the old tunnel last, rolled forward for a few seconds, and then came to a screeching halt. He fell down from its roof and hit the ground hard, then stood up with a stagger. Another wall of shadows rose, blocking the mouth of the tunnel behind them, this one much thicker than the previous ones. Instantly, it came under a savage attack. Its black surface trembled, not cracking yet, but also visibly struggling to withstand the never-ending rain of blows. In the echoing silence of the tunnel, Sonny bent over, spat blood, and then tiredly looked up. His voice sounded stifled. "Someone better blow up that entrance fast." The convoy stopped soon after entering the tunnel. For a few moments, nothing apart from the muffled blows that continued to rain on the wall of shadows could be heard. Scared and exhausted, the people were all lost and slightly disoriented. Sonny's voice brought them back to reality. Glancing into the depths of the tunnel to make sure that nothing was attacking them from that direction, at least not yet, he backed up a little and studied the cold stones above him. Surely, detonating a part of the tunnel's roof was not the smartest of ideas, considering how old it was. However, the alternative was even worse. They had to stop the brood beasts from following the convoy inside, and his wall of shadows was not going to last long, considering how little essence Sonny had left. He had truly burned through a lot of it during that last desperate dash to save the rear vehicles. Actually, Sonny had not even known that he was capable of doing something like that. The scope and scale of that complex use of shadow manifestation was unlike anything he had been able to achieve before. The urgency of the situation and the raging adrenaline had helped him achieve a new level of mastery over his aspect. And now he was exhausted, so the entrance of the tunnel had to go. "I'll feel really awkward if there's a collapsed section of it further ahead." Still, the convoy could find a way to dig through stone debris. They would not be able to resurrect from dead if the devouring cloud swallowed them whole, though. With the help of explosives that Sergeant Jeer provided, Kim's ability to see weak points of both living and inanimate objects, and Professor Obel's knowledge of mundane science, they were able to detonate a few small charges and collapse the entrance of the tunnel, cutting themselves off from the outside world. Now there was no way back, only forward deeper into the darkness. Nevertheless, the people were finally safe, relatively speaking, of course. They still did not know what awaited them ahead in the eerie expanse of the old tunnel, so Sonny posted plenty of sentries in front of the Rhino. Only then did he have time to assess the state of things. The convoy looked battered. Every vehicle received at least a little damage, and many were splattered with blood of the nightmare creatures that the irregulars and the mundane soldiers had killed. However, almost all of them could still move. The only exception was the rear military vehicle that Sonny had saved. That one was a complete goner. In fact, it looked more like a heap of scrap metal than a working machine now. The fact that it had somehow managed to drive into the tunnel was nothing short of miraculous. Its crew had suffered too. One of the soldiers was dead, and the rest were seriously wounded. A few of them would have died from those wounds too, if not for Quentin. Currently, he was trying to stem the bleeding of a turret operator, whose arm was terribly mangled. Even with the healer's abilities, the man's limb was too damaged to preserve. After taking one glance at the terrible mess of torn flesh and splintered bones, Sonny knew that it would have to be amputated. He had already been in a somber mood because of the exhaustion, but now it turned even darker. Perhaps he should be thanking the dead gods that only one of his men had been killed during the desperate escape from the devouring cloud, but Sonny did not feel thankful. Instead, he remembered the brazen claim he had made to Professor Obel not too long ago, a promise to try and save everyone who had entrusted their lives to him. Sonny had already failed that promise twice. The death of the old refugee woman had been outside his control, but the fallen soldier, that one was a direct result of his decisions. Sonny had killed many people in the past, but he had never been responsible for someone's death, or rather, had never experienced the death of someone whom he was responsible for. It was a bitter, scathing feeling. Why did he have to bear the burden of some stranger's death? Who asked that soldier to be so weak? Sonny clenched his fists. So annoying. He remained motionless for a while, then winced. In any case, the loss of a military vehicle was painful, but not impactful. Losing another civilian transport would have been much more damaging, not to mention lethal. The wounded soldiers would be out of commission for a few days or longer, depending on the severity of their injuries, but in the end, they were going to survive. All in all, they had all gotten off easy. Sonny had fully expected to watch the whole convoy be destroyed after finding out about the approaching horde of flying abominations. Losing just a single soldier, no matter how resentful he felt about it, was incredible luck. Of course, they were not out of the woods yet. He did not know anything about the old tunnel, but suspected that traveling though it would not be very safe. In fact, his decision to seek shelter inside could potentially result in a fate similar, or even far worse, than being quickly gobbled up by the devouring cloud. Brimming with optimism am I. Any kind of nightmare creatures could have built a nest here after the chain of nightmares came. More disturbingly, the tunnel could be home to something that had entered the waking world much earlier. Humans did a good job of either closing or containing those gates that opened within the borders or in the vicinity of population centers, out of necessity, but no one bothered or had resources to do the same in the wilderness. Provided, most gates manifested near places where a lot of people lived, but not all. Somewhere inside the tunnel, they could potentially meet an abomination that had been dwelling here for decades, or maybe even half a century. Surely there was also a possibility that there were no nightmare creatures inside, and they were completely safe. Honestly speaking, the chances of that were equally high. Unconvinced, Sonny walked to the front of the convoy, past the massive form of the rhino and stopped near the sentries. Up ahead, a long stretch of the tunnel was illuminated by the headlights of the APC. He stared into the darkness beyond. After a while, Sonny looked down and let out a heavy sigh. That does not bode well. He couldn't see anything. Not in the sense that there was nothing ahead, but rather that he could not see through the gloom that enveloped the tunnel. Which could mean only one thing: that this place was not shrouded in shadows, but instead drowned by true, pure, elemental darkness. True darkness was different from light and shadows. Shadows existed in places where light was obscured or could not reach. If the shadow was vast and deep enough, people mistook it for darkness, but all it truly was the absence of light. True darkness, however, was more than that. It was an elemental force of its own, one that was both independent from and opposed to light. Instead of a simple lack of light, pure darkness was its rival. And since light and shadows always went hand in hand, it was also the enemy of shadows, strange as it may sound. That was why Sonny suddenly felt the cold touch of unease when he discovered its presence. True darkness was exceedingly rare and mysterious. He had only encountered it once before, in the ruined cathedral of the Dark City, where it had been born of and controlled by the cathedral's guardian, the Forsaken Knight, the bastard that had gutted him like a pig. In fact, that unfortunate encounter had been the fault of the darkness that the fallen devil wielded. If not for its veil, Sonny might have not allowed the Black Knight to get so close. That was because his eyes, which were capable of peering through any shadow, were as blind in true darkness as that of a mundane human. Sonny had not seen the approaching Forsaken Knight in the shroud of darkness, and now he could not see into the depths of the tunnel. Worse still, the fallen devil of the ruined cathedral had only controlled a modest amount of true darkness. Here in the tunnel, however, there was a whole ocean of it. Sonny grimaced. Well, there goes the hope that there are no abominations inside. He remained near the sentries for a minute or two, then turned around and tiredly walked back to the rhino. We'll rest here for a few hours. The convoy was not in any condition to continue moving anyway. The vehicles needed to be repaired, and the wounded had to receive treatment. People desperately needed rest. Plus, what good would it do to leave the tunnel before the devouring cloud moved on? They had to wait until the swarm passed through. Sonny was exhausted as well. Entering the rhino, he fell on one of the seats in the lounge area and closed his eyes. Why do I feel like we jumped out of the frying pan straight into the fire? Nothing good ever came from going underground. Every time Sonny had, something nasty had been waiting for him there. His distrust of underground passages and tunnels was only rivaled by his dislike of the sea. At least the tunnel seemed dry. Scowling, Sonny tried to empty his mind and concentrate on circulating what little essence he had left through his body. No matter what came next, he had to be ready. Samara was recovering from utterly depleting her essence, and Quentin was busy healing the injured soldiers. Kim and Luster were performing field repairs on the civilian transports. The sleeper was creating a new batch of poisoned bullets to replace those expended during the flight from the devouring cloud. Sergeant Jeer's ammunition reserves were at a point where each round had to count. Only Bell and Dorn had nothing to do, which was why Sonny chose them to accompany him on a scouting mission. He wanted to find out how far the exit from the tunnel was, or if not, then at least explore a long stretch of it before leading the convoy forward. Nobody knew how long the tunnel was. There were a lot of them cut through the mountains in the Antarctic center, where the terrain was too uneven to build straight roads. Whenever a road met a mountain outcropping that was too wide to go around, though, people had often chosen to simply burrow through it to create a convenient shortcut. As a result, the length of tunnels varied greatly, from several dozen meters to 10 kilometers or more. Most of them had been created during the dark times. Later, when the constant wars, environmental cataclysms, and the descent of the nightmare spell had reduced human population and concentrated it inside a small amount of vast and easily defended cities, most of the mountain roads went out of use and were abandoned. So there was no information on the tunnel. It could have been only a few hundreds meters long or stretched forward for a dozen kilometers. Considering the local terrain, Sonny suspected that the latter would turn out closer to the truth. Summoning the cruel sight, he glanced at Bell and Dorn. "Are you ready?" They nodded. "Yes, sir." They were standing in front of the rhino. A few people were looking at the three irregulars, but only Professor Obel approached to see them off. "Be careful, young people. Places such as this can be quite dangerous. Don't use any memories or abilities that have to do with fire, too. Now that we are underground, it would be all too easy to burn all the oxygen away." Sonny looked at the old man, with a bit of tension hidden behind his outwardly confident expression. "Anything else we should know?" Professor Obel thought for a moment, then shrugged. Many of these tunnels went through several rounds of additional excavation to serve as bomb shelters during the latter stages of the war between the but those names probably won't tell you much. Suffice it to say, you might find that the structure of the tunnel is not as straightforward as one might expect. Sonny sighed. "All right, we are going then. If we aren't back after 2 hours, well, I am not going to lie, if something manages to kill me, then all of you will probably die soon too. So there's nothing much you'll be able to do at that point." He tried to force out an encouraging smile, failed, and simply turned around. Carrying luminous memories, Sonny and his people walked past the nervous sentries and dove into the darkness without looking back. Sonny had grown accustomed to using his shadows to scout ahead in dangerous situations, explore the world around him, and discover hidden threats. However, this time, he could not, simply because the shadows were as blind as him in the embrace of true darkness. Walking deeper into the tunnel, he instantly felt tense and incredibly vulnerable. Things were even worse than Sonny had thought. Not only was his sight suddenly limited to a mere single point of view, not only could he not see anything outside the narrow circle of light created by the luminous memories like a mere human. Even his ability to sense the shapes and movements of shadows was crippled. Because, of course, no shadow existed within darkness. That unique part of his perception had become so ingrained into him that now that it was gone, Sonny felt blinded. It was as though he suddenly lost his eyes and ears. The whole world seemed strange, unclear, and muddled. The sudden change was so severe that he almost lost balance. Damn! Belle and Dorn, who lived their whole lives like that, did not seem to be disturbed. Sure, they had somewhat come to rely on the ability to see in darkness that Kim often shared to them, but not to a degree where it became their second nature. Sonny, on the other hand, he was disoriented and felt utterly exposed. How horrible! Grimacing, he gripped the shaft of the cruel sight tighter and continued walking. The blade of the somber spear did not shine yet, instead absorbing some of the light produced by the lanterns of the irregulars in case he needed it in the future. The tunnel was wide enough for two vehicles to pass each other without brushing sides and utterly empty. Nothing but impenetrable darkness filled its silent expanse, and so their steps echoed, reflecting from the cold stone walls. Sonny glanced at Belle and Dorn with a bit of displeasure. He was walking as noiselessly as usual, trained to remain unnoticed by the long months of hunting down powerful abominations in the dark city. However, the two fighters of the melee vanguard were not versed in stealth, and their equipment was not suited for it either. Way to announce our position to everyone and everything. I have a bad feeling about this. Although many nightmare creatures possessed some way to perceive the world in the absence of light, he was still used to being the one to stalk his prey unseen. Now, however, the roles were reversed. Sonny was at the mercy of whatever creature it was that hid in the darkness. And there had to be something there, without a doubt. True darkness, after all, had not come from nothing. What kind of ghastly horror will I have to fight this time? They carefully moved forward, sticking close to the wall of the tunnel. A few minutes passed, then a dozen. What Sonny feared the most did not happen. Nothing attacked them. And there were no collapsed sections of the tunnel's roof that could block the convoy's way out. However, there was also no sign of exit. The tunnel simply stretched forward, seemingly endlessly and completely empty. After a while, Sonny managed to shrug off his discomfort and adjust to having his perception severely crippled, as well as he could. It was still deeply disturbing, though. Half an hour passed without them encountering any threats. How far do you think we have walked? Belle and Dorn thought for a moment. The giant man shrugged. 3 kilometers, maybe less. A deep frown appeared on Sonny's face. 3 kilometers was not a small amount. Of course, there were far longer tunnels out there. The floor also seemed flat and did not slope neither up nor down. Still, it was strange that they had not been attacked yet. Keep your eyes open. The small scouting squad continued forward. After a while, they encountered a small opening in the wall of the tunnel, leading into the depths of the mountain. The narrow branch, too, was drowned in true darkness. Standing near it, Sonny thought that he heard a distant hum. However, a moment later it was gone, chased away by Dorn's voice. This must be one of the additional tunnel shafts that Professor Obel spoke about. There's probably a whole network of them inside the mountain, excavated to house the population in case of a nuclear strike. Bell scratched the back of his head. Who uses nuclear bombs to kill people? Aren't bioweapons far more effective? Sonny looked at him darkly. Tell that to Europe. At that moment, Dorn cleared his throat. Actually, Captain, they use both nuclear and bioweapons in Europe. Oh. Well, it was not like Sonny had received a good education. He had barely known that places other than NQSC existed before the fateful conversation with Master Jet. In any case, he had to decide whether they should explore the side branch of the tunnel or continue forward along the main one. In the end, he chose to stick to their current path. He did not really care what was out there, in the old network of abandoned passages. As long as the convoy could drive past and reach the exit, Sonny did not have to know. They walked and walked and walked, and nothing happened. At some point, the lack of terrible nightmare creatures lunging at them from the darkness started to disturb Sonny more than the possibility of a sudden attack. This is too eerie. Eventually, the 1 hour mark passed without them finding anything. Not the source of the true darkness, not the nightmare creatures that might have made a nest in the tunnel, and not the exit. There was not even a hint of it. Stop. Sonny frowned as he looked forward. There was nothing but darkness ahead. In the end, he sighed and turned around. The scouting mission was both a resounding success and a resounding failure. They did not find any active threats to the convoy, but they also failed to conclusively prove that there were none. In any case, the time he had allotted for the scouting mission was up. Let's head back. Now, his best choice was to lead the convoy forward and hope for the best. Despite the lack of nightmare creatures, or of anything, really, inside the tunnel, Sonny felt very uneasy. Braving the silent darkness, they retraced their steps and arrived back to the collapsed entrance of the tunnel after a long and tense hour. Nothing dangerous happened on their way back, and the convoy seemed to have fared well in their absence, too. The uneventfulness of it all was deeply disturbing. Hiding his concern, Sonny glanced at the dark walls surrounding them. The battered vehicles stood motionlessly, their wheels resting on the cold asphalt floor. Here and there, people could be seen resting or hurrying to complete various tasks. I don't like this. Frowning, he headed toward the hatch of the Rhino. The people he needed to hear from were already gathered there, ready to report the state of things. As Sonny passed the sentries, one of them suddenly called out to him. Captain Sunless, sir. He slowed down and gave the soldier a dark look. Yes. The man hesitated for a few moments. His face was still, but his tired eyes were full of some unknown, intense emotion. Outside, I was part of the rear vehicle's crew. What you did for us back then, near the end, you really saved us. Thank you, sir. Sonny stared at him blankly for a bit, then turned away with a scoff. I am in charge of this convoy. These are my vehicles and you are my people. No one takes what's mine, especially without paying a price. Do you even know how much a vehicle like that costs? With that, he shook his head and walked away. What a weird guys. The irregulars, as well as Sergeant Jeer, Professor Obel, and Bate were waiting in the command suite of the Rhino. Sonny received several reports, which slightly improved his mood. The convoy had lost 1 civilian transport and 1 military vehicle as the result of encountering the devouring cloud. Luckily, it did not affect their logistics too adversely. After sacrificing the mobile infirmary to accommodate the displaced refugees, all they had really lost was a bit of firepower. The remaining vehicles had all been patched up and ready to move. Sergeant Jeer sighed. We don't have a lot of ammunition left, sir. Additionally, our reserves of drinking water are also severely reduced. We discarded a lot of it to lighten the load on the transports before the swarm arrived. It should not become a problem in the next several days, but after that. Sonny waved a hand dismissively. Don't worry about water. I have a literally endless source of water. He remained silent for a while, considering the options. They could either pass through the tunnel or remain where they were and try to dig their way out when some time had passed. Both options were less than ideal. It all comes down to how long I want to remain in the tunnel, it seems. The first option would allow the convoy to escape from underground sooner, if all went well during the drive to the opposite exit. The second option would force them to stay inside for much longer, but did not demand diving deeper into the chilling darkness. Neither was free of risk. Curses. In the end, Sonny just really disliked the idea of staying in the eerie tunnel, even a minute longer than it was necessary. He sighed. "Start the engines, we're leaving." A few minutes later, the rhino came to life and rolled forward, slowly gaining speed. The beams of powerful spotlights installed on its roof cut through the darkness, forcing it to flee and cling to the walls of the tunnel. The civilian transports and the military vehicles followed, staying close to the massive APC. The darkness flowed back and devoured everything once again behind them, making it seem as though the convoy was traveling inside a small, fleeting, fragile island of light. Sonny climbed to the roof of the rhino and stayed there with Saint, staring into the darkness with a grim expression on his face. He was still blind to everything that was happening outside the small bubble of light, which made him incredibly nervous. Where is it? Where is the source of all this darkness? When will it attack? Minutes passed, but just like during the scouting mission, nothing happened. The convoy rolled forward with modest but constant speed. Meter after meter of old asphalt disappeared under the wheels of the rhino, and the stone walls seemed to move past them, vanishing into the darkness. The tunnel was silent, with only the passing of the human vehicles making any noise. From time to time, side passages opened up to either left or right of the convoy, making Sonny especially nervous. All these paths sloped down, leading deeper underground. He was prepared for something to lunge at them from the darkness, but nothing did. "Ignore them. We don't need to set foot in those passages. We just need to reach the exit and escape this dreadful place." Just like that, an hour passed, and then another and another. The tunnel continued to stretch forward, seemingly endless. The more time passed, the deeper Sonny's scowl became. After a while, he finally left the roof of the rhino and dove back into its interior with a dark expression. Walking up to Luster, he ground his teeth and said, "That's enough, stop the convoy." Luster glanced at him questioningly, then shrugged. The APC slowed down and then stopped. The other vehicles followed suit, and soon the whole convoy came to a halt. Sonny left the rhino and stood still for a few moments, staring at the weathered asphalt. Sergeant Jeer and the members of his cohort soon approached from the direction of other vehicles, while Luster, Professor Obel, and Bate exited the rhino through the hatch. Saint walked over to the edge of the roof, looking at them from above indifferently. Most of the gathered people had grave expressions on their faces. Noticing the grim mood, Luster blinked a couple of times, then turned to Sonny. Captain, why did we stop? Is there a problem?" Sonny looked at him silently. "Yes, there's a problem, you fool, can't you tell?" Luster scratched the back of his head. "What, is there a nightmare creature ahead?" Sonny sighed, then looked up. "No, there's nothing ahead, that's the problem. We've been driving for about 7 hours, correct? What was our average speed?" The young man hesitated for a moment. 30 kilometers per hour, sir." They had not rushed and kept a modest speed, to be able to react in case danger appeared from ahead. Sonny nodded. "That is more than 200 kilometers of going straight forward, and yet there is no exit. Do you see the problem now?" Luster's eyes suddenly widened. "Oh well, if you put it like that, it really is weird." Sonny gritted his teeth. "It's not just weird. If there was a tunnel of that length in Antarctica, it would have been the longest one in the world by far. Everyone would have known about it." Luster paled a little, then studied everyone's faces. "How come no one did then?" Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story.